Now, gather in close for a minute, 'cause if you've ever walked the Red River Gorge, there's a chance you've stepped into a place you weren't meant to notice. It looks like any other stretch of trail. Same trees, same rock walls, same mountain air. But when you cross into it, the woods don't just get quiet. They go wrong. Birds stop mid-song. Wind dies like somebody turned it off. Even your own footsteps start sounding too loud, like you're interrupting something. Old-timers say that's when you ain't alone anymore. One man felt it when heavy footsteps started moving along the ridge above him. Slow, patient, matching him step for step. He stopped. They stopped. He walked again, and whatever was up there walked too. For just one heartbeat he saw it, taller than any man should be, shoulders wide enough to break the sky, arms hanging low like it didn't fear nothing. Then it slipped behind a tree and disappeared without a single sound. Now, here's the part most folks don't know. That stretch of trail shows up again and again in reports going back decades. Different hikers, different years, same silence, same footsteps, same watcher. And tonight, we're going to find out why. Welcome back to Kentucky Melody, where the mountains remember better than we do, and the stories don't ever really end. Tonight, we're heading down into the hollers and high ridges of Red River Gorge, a place most folks know for postcard views and weekend hikes. But if you listen to the old stories, there's something else moving through those woods. And before we dive in, I want to tell y'all something special. This year, Kentucky Melody's going to have a booth at the second annual Red River Gorge Bigfoot Fest down in Stanton, Kentucky. We'll be there swapping stories, meeting folks, and listening to whatever you've seen out in these hills. We even put together a special Bigfoot Fest shirt just for it, a way for our people to spot each other in the crowd. If you grab one from our online store and wear it to the festival, we'll know you're a part of this story right along with us. Now, long before there were trail maps and cabin rentals, before climbers gave cute nicknames to cliffs, this land already had a reputation. The native peoples that passed through here, Shawnee, Cherokee, and others, treated this region with caution. Later on, the old settlers, they might not have known the old names for it, but they felt it. Those sudden pockets of silence, those stretches of woods that just felt occupied. They'd talk about watchers in the timber. Not demons, not monsters, just something that didn't belong to our world of fences and deeds. And the strangest part is, if you line up the modern reports, the hikers, the campers, the late-night drivers, the search and rescue folks, they all start sounding less like separate stories and more like little torn pieces of the same page. Tonight, we're going to hold those pieces up to the light and see what kind of shape they make. Our first fragment starts near Chimney Top Rock. It was one of those mornings where the fog sits low and stubborn in the valleys, the kind where the gorge don't look like a place at all, more like a dream half remembered. The witness, just a regular hiker used to being out there, set out early. The air had that cold, wet feel that crawls inside your sleeves. Damp leaves stuck to his boots. Every breath you take hangs just a second too long in front of your face. He said at first it was just quiet. The good kind of quiet. Birds calling here and there. Distant woodpecker. His own footfalls crunching on gravel. Then, slowly, bit by bit, that everyday forest noise peeled away. Birds went first, then the bugs, then the wind. Like some invisible hand was turning the volume knob down on the whole gorge. That's when he heard it, up above him, along the spine of the ridge. Footsteps, heavy ones, not choppy and quick like a deer, not the bumbling crash of a bear. Each step had weight. He counted several. Each one landed with the same slow rhythm. He stopped in the trail. The steps stopped too. He took 2 careful steps. Above him, 2 heavy crunches answered back. Now, a lot of folks would have turned around right there, but he'd logged a lot of miles out here over the years, so he told himself it was just some early morning hiker taking a shortcut along the ridgeline. Maybe a big guy, maybe carrying a pack. He rounded a bend in the trail where the trees opened up just enough to see sky. He looked up and saw the silhouette. Outlined in pale fog was a tall figure walking the ridge. Upright, back straight, not a branch swaying in the wind, not a misread shadow. He knew the difference. He said it moved like it had perfect balance on uneven rock. Long arms swung low by its sides. It covered ground quicker than he could have, and he was down there on level trail. It came to a stop, turned, just enough for its head to angle toward him. He still couldn't make out any details, just a darker shape against the gray. But he felt it. That sudden weight in his chest, like standing in front of a screen door and realizing there's somebody standing just inside it in the dark. He reached slowly for his camera. Didn't run, didn't shout, just tried to take a picture. Something to prove to himself he'd seen what he'd seen. The second his hand moved, the figure slid behind a tree trunk. Not a panicked run, not a wild leap. Just one smooth step and gone. No sound of it going down the hillside. No sticks snapping, no stones tumbling. Just that heavy silence again, sitting on the woods like fog. He stood there longer than he cares to admit. Finally, his legs remembered how to move. On the way down, later that morning, near a soft patch where runoff had turned dirt into dark clay, he saw him. Impressions. Not crisp, castable tracks like on a TV show, but long, wide dents pushed deep into the softened ground. Longer than his own boots by several inches, set far apart. He tried stepping between them and had to stretch to match. He never wrote Bigfoot on any official form. Didn't want to be that guy at work everybody talked about behind his back. But he also never hiked Chimney Top alone again. Now, if Chimney Top was the first piece of the puzzle, the next one sits near Nada Tunnel. If you've driven it, you know it ain't exactly peaceful at night. That narrow one-lane bore cut through the rock, damp stone walls sweating in your headlights, your engine echoing back at you like it belongs to somebody else. One local was driving in late, coming back from work. Windows up, heat running, radio low. He crept up on the tunnel entrance like always. Slow, cautious, checking for headlights on the other side. That's when he saw it. At the edge of his beams, just outside the tunnel mouth, stood a figure. Tall, too tall for your average fella. Not hunched like a bear might look if it reared up. Just standing there between the trees. The driver lifted his foot off the gas. The figure didn't move. didn't wave, didn't flinch at the light. It was like the thing was taking the measure of the truck. He said his first thought was, "That's gotta be a prank. Some fool in a suit." Then it stepped forward. One long stride, then another. It crossed the entire lane in 2 calm, even steps, arms hanging low, head turning just slightly, enough that the headlights caught a faint shine where you'd expect eyes to be. Not red, not glowing, just light hitting something smooth. And then it slid off the road into brush so thick the driver knew he couldn't have walked through it without sounding like a freight train. Yet it went in, and the woods took it back, without so much as a twig cracking. The next morning, he came back in the daylight, just to prove to himself there was some logical explanation. What he found was this: ground disturbed, leaves pushed aside, a few elongated dents where something heavy had stepped off the road, in a straight line, heading deeper in. No boot prints, no tire tracks, just that. Maybe it was some kid in a costume who really knew how to move through brush barefoot. Maybe it was the same presence that walked that ridge near Chimney Top, using the old paths while we drive our little roads across 'em. Up on Oxier Ridge, the story turns from sight to sound. A group of campers set up near the ridge one fall evening. Good trip, good weather, fire crackling, stars trying their best to peek through the treetops. They'd been laughing and talking most of the night. Then, sometime after midnight, the mood shifted. They didn't know why. Conversation just sorta died down. They were sitting there, listening to the fire pop, when they heard it. A long, deep call rolling across the cliffs. Not coyote, not owl, not anything a bunch of folks raised around these hills recognized. This sound came from something with a chest on it. You could feel it in your ribs more than hear it in your ears. One of them grabbed their phone and started recording. Before they finished whispering about what it might be, another call answered from farther away. Then a third. Then nothing. No bugs, no night birds, no wind. Just the hiss of the fire and the sound of their own breathing. That's when they heard the footsteps. Slow, heavy, out past the glow of the fire, circling, crunch, pause, crunch. Closer on one side. Then the sound would slide around behind them, then to the other side. Each time they shined their flashlights into the trees, all they saw was branches and darkness. No eyes, no shapes. But every time the light came back to the fire, the sound started again, not rushing in. Not running away, just holding that same distance, nursing the same slow circle. One of the campers said it felt like something was walking a fence line, only the fence was us. They packed up early the next morning, and to this day, none of them can agree on what made those calls, but every one of them agrees. They weren't alone on that ridge. Now we move over near Indian Staircase. Any of y'all who've climbed that area know, those stone ledges have a way of making you feel small, like you're walking up the spine of something ancient. A small group of climbers was making their way up, roped in, focused on their handholds. It was late afternoon. The light had that honey gold glow you only get right before sunset. One of them glanced up between moves and froze. Silhouetted against the sky, standing at the top of the rock line, was a figure, Tall, still, too still. At that height, most people have a little sway to 'em, knees adjusting, shoulders shifting. This shape just stood there, balanced, watching them work their way up. Nobody said the word Bigfoot. They weren't thinking that. They figured it was another climber, maybe somebody waiting on their group. But nobody moved like that. One of them lifted a hand and waved. The figure didn't wave back. It just lowered itself, smooth as oil pouring, down behind the rocks. Not a scramble, not a stumble, no loose stones skittering. Just there, and then not there. By the time the group reached the top, the ridge was empty. No other packs, no fresh tracks, just open rock and the same quiet view looking out over miles of forest. One of them said later it felt less like a person watching climbers and more like something that had been standing up there long before they ever touched that stone, just taking note that they'd passed through. Next fragment drops us near Sky Bridge. A family, mom, dad, 2 kids, out for a late-day hike. Sun dropping low, light filtering through the leaves in long, thin stripes. They had walked maybe a mile when the dog, usually friendly and curious, started acting strange. Ears up, hackles raised. It kept twisting back toward the right side of the trail, staring into the trees, low growling under its breath. The dad chalked it up to a deer, maybe a raccoon, right up till the moment he heard the brush moving too. Not crashing, not darting out to cross, just this steady swish of leaves and grass, pacing them. They kept walking. Whatever was in the trees matched their speed. They stopped. It stopped. He called out, "Hello? Somebody out there?" No answer, just that empty, smothering silence. They walked again. The sound moved with them. Finally, at a bend where the trail opened out just a bit, he caught sight of it between 2 trunks. Tall, dark, broad, standing upright with one arm against a tree. He said the first thing he noticed wasn't fur, or hands, or even the height. It was how still it could be when it wanted. He watched it and realized it was watching him right back. The kids went quiet behind him. Mom put a hand on each of their shoulders. Nobody screamed. Nobody ran. The dog stopped growling, just froze, tail tucked, eyes locked on that shadow. The figure didn't charge, didn't make a sound. It turned its head slowly, as if taking stock of the whole family, then shifted its weight and stepped behind thicker brush where they couldn't see it anymore. The sound of movement faded. Branches didn't thrash. Leaves didn't explode. It just blended back into the woods. At dinner that night, the kids didn't talk much. When they finally did, the youngest said, "It didn't feel mean, Daddy, just like it was trying to decide if we belong there." Now we slide over toward Gray's Arch. Couple of hunters early in the morning after a night of rain. Ground still soft as sponge cake in the low spots. They were checking sign when they saw 'em. Big impressions in the mud. Not crisp enough for plaster, but clear enough to see length and width. Longer than any boot either of 'em owned. Wide across the front, like something with a real spread to its toes. Stride was the worst part. Each step was set so far apart that when one of the men tried to mimic it, he had to stretch his legs out until his hip popped. These prints headed toward a rock face. Not a gentle slope, not an easy little climb. A steep, rough mess most people avoid. And then, They just stopped. No skidding marks, no heel slides, no broken rock from something taking a tumble, just mud prints, stone, nothing. One hunter said either it stepped up on rock and never touched soft ground again, or it went somewhere we couldn't follow. And in these hills, when tracks end at stone, the old folks start talking about caves and things that use them the way we use doors. Near Natural Bridge State Resort Park, there's a story that threads right along with the others. Group of campers set up just off a side trail, close enough to hear cars in the distance if they strained, but far enough in to feel like the woods had swallowed them up. Everything felt normal till sometime after dark when they heard a sharp knock echo through the trees. Then another, not like a branch falling, not random, rhythmic. 3 knocks, silence, then farther off, 3 more. They laughed it off at first, joked about other campers messing around. Then came the rock clacks, clear, sharp clicks like 2 stones snapped together, from one direction, then an answer from another. The more they listened, the more it sounded less like random noise, and more like some kind of call and response. One of them scanned the tree line with a flashlight. That's when he saw the eyes, up on the ridge above him, a pair of faint, reflective points catching just enough light to gleam. Too far apart, too high off the ground to belong to a raccoon or a fox. They didn't blink, didn't bob like an owl's. They just stared. He kept the beam there for what felt like forever. Then, without any big movement he could track, those eyes simply weren't there anymore. No shadow pulling back, no clear turn of a head, just there, then gone. He shut the light off, and nobody in that camp slept right the rest of the night. On Highway 715, late one night, another puzzle piece moved across Blacktop. Driver heading home, not speeding, just cruising along. No other headlights in sight. Radio low, road empty. He came around a curve and his headlights swung wide and lit up something big already stepping into his lane. He slammed on the brakes. The truck nosed down. Everything in the cab lurched forward. In that split-second glare, he saw the shape. Tall, dark, with the suggestion of shoulders and arms, not hunched over like a deer caught mid-bound. Not looking back in surprise like a person who'd misjudged the timing. It just kept striding. 2 steps, maybe 3, and it was already at the other side of the asphalt, slipping into the tree line. The dash cam, later, didn't show much more than a smear of motion and flare from the headlights. He told folks the worst part wasn't nearly hitting it. It was the way it moved. No flinch, no hesitation. Like it knew exactly how long it had before he reached that spot. Like it had crossed that road 100 times before he ever drove it once. Then we've got the story the locals whisper about. The one from a missing hiker search. Search and rescue volunteers were moving in a line, fanning out through a dense timber, calling a name into the woods over and over. The witness was on the far right edge of that line. He said every time the group moved forward, he heard something move forward with him out in the trees to his right. Not behind, not ahead, always parallel, always just out of sight, brush shifting, leaf litter crunching, slow, deliberate. He called out, thinking maybe it was another volunteer off course. No answer. Radios stayed quiet. He stopped, listened for a few heartbeats, Only the faint sound of the others moving ahead reached him. Then that parallel shuffle started up again, like whatever it was didn't want him falling behind. Not crowding him, not closing in, just keeping pace. He never saw anything. But when the search wrapped for the day and they all came back to base, he quietly asked if anyone else had worked the right flank that afternoon. Nobody had. Finally, we come to the cave. Not one of the big tourist ones, not a marked attraction. Just a dark mouth in the rock where runoff in time chewed out a hollow. A couple of hikers followed a faint game trail and found it by accident. Outside the cave, they saw odd things. Small saplings bent over and woven together where they shouldn't have grown that way. Rocks stacked in little deliberate piles. Not natural slides, not something kicked up by boots. They both noticed the smell first. Musky. Animal. Not dead, but wild. Like wet dog and earth and something else they couldn't place. One of them moved a little closer to the entrance, letting their eyes adjust to the dark. He said at first he thought he was just looking into the black. Then, slowly, a shape separated itself from the darkness. A pale, oval sort of hint, like the suggestion of a face where the rock shouldn't be that color, high up in the shadow inside. Two darker pits where eyes ought to be. No sound, no growl, no hiss, just that face-shaped absence looking out. He took half a step back, heart jackhammering. Didn't scream, didn't run, just blinked, and when his eyes opened again, it was gone. Whatever it was had retreated back into the dark. The smell hung there a minute longer, then even that faded. They didn't go inside. They didn't want to know what those stone-stacked markers meant. They just backed away, slow and careful, like people leaving somebody else's front porch. Now, if you take any one of these stories, you can shrug it off. Fog playing tricks on the eyes, shadows, bad audio, nerves. But when you lay 'em all down together, chimney top, Nada Tunnel, Oxier Ridge, Indian Staircase, Sky Bridge, Gray's Arch, Natural Bridge, Highway 715, the search line, that cave, you start to see a shape behind the shapes. Something tall, something quiet. Something that moves with confidence through this land like it's walked these ridges and hollers long before there were park boundaries or trail markers. No attacks, no dragged-off campers, no horror movie slaughter, just a pattern. It stays at the edges. It keeps its distance. It watches. Like a shepherd walking fence lines most people can't see. Maybe Bigfoot is the name folks gave it because that's all they could latch on to. But out here, when the woods go silent, it feels older than any word we've put on it. And maybe that's why, year after year, people keep coming back to Red River Gorge. They say they come for the overlooks, the campfires, the climbing routes, but a lot of them, they're chasing that feeling, that moment where the forest suddenly feels bigger than you, and older and aware. This year, all those stories, the old ones, the new ones, the stuff y'all have seen and heard, they're all gonna kind of flow together in one place. The second annual Red River Gorge Bigfoot Fest in Stanton, Kentucky on May 30th, 2026. And we'll be there. Kentucky Melody is setting up a booth, right there with the folks who hike these trails. Live in these hollers and swap these stories in the glow of porch lights and campfires. We ain't showing up just as a YouTube channel. We're showing up as people who love these mountains, and the mysteries that walk 'em. We also put together a special Bigfoot Fest shirt for this year. We didn't design it to be just another souvenir. We made it for the folks who feel like they've stepped into something older out there in the gorge. A kind of quiet little sign that says, "Yeah, I've heard the stories, and I'm listening too." If you wear that shirt to the festival, we'll know you're part of this with us, part of the same trail of stories, part of the same long, watchful silence. Come by the booth. Tell us what you've seen. Tell us what you've heard. You never know. Your story might be the next piece of this puzzle. Because once you've felt the gorge go quiet like that, really quiet, it don't ever leave you. You notice it in other places, on back roads, on lonely ridges, that sudden drop in sound, that weight in the air, where every hair on your arm stands up like it's listening for you. You remember the ridge where the silhouette paused, the tunnel where the shape crossed without hurry, the calls on the wind, the eyes on the ridge, the tracks that ended at stone, the cave where the dark seemed a little too aware of itself. Different people, different days, different parts of the map. But one presence, moving like a shadow stitched to the land itself, not hiding, not chasing, just waiting, watching, enduring. Long after our fires burn down to ash, long after the last car pulls out of the gorge for the night, the woods settle back into themselves. The crickets start again. The wind creeps back through the leaves. And somewhere out there, on some ridgeline we haven't named, or down in some little side hollow we've never walked, something listens to that silence, the same way it listened before there was ever a road sign that said, "Welcome to Red River Gorge." So if you find yourself walking out there, and the birds go quiet all at once, and the air feels heavy on your skin, and you hear those slow, measured footsteps up on the ridge, don't just tell yourself it's nothing. Slow down. Listen. Because sometimes that dead quiet moment ain't the woods falling asleep. It's the moment. Something ancient finally notices you. And in the Red River Gorge, someone always is.